can get started in another minute. We'll just see if any more folks are going to join us.
Hold him up, John. Hold him up. Wow, what a big boy.
How you doing, Carol? You're on mute.
I said I'm doing okay. I had a reason to go to the urgent care this afternoon, but I'm fine. I got meds, so that's good.
Uh-oh.
That's good. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be here.
Good, great. Got to
Right.
get you, Darren. We got to get you and Darren together.
Yeah.
Talk some zoning, talk some
Yeah.
land use.
Yeah.
You sounds like you've been having some trouble getting to sleep at night. I'll put you right to sleep. You have no problem hitting the sack.
Oh, man.
Yes, he will. Yes, he will.
Come talk to my 3-month-old then.
Oh yeah.
Amber, do we have mostly everyone here? Or are we still waiting on some folks?
We have everyone.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Velvet. Wherever you are. Oh, there you are. Well, I just want to call this special commission on equity, inclusion, racial conciliation for February 10th to order. Can I get a motion to approve our minutes? And if after we approve our minutes, we can take a moment of silence. But can I get a motion to approve our minutes for December?
I move we
2nd?
approve the minutes for December 22nd and January 14th, 2021.
So moved. Any amendments?
Second.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Any amendments to the minutes?
No, you got a second.
All right, thank you. With that, the minutes are approved. Just want to take a few minutes to, I don't have anything special to say, but I think just a couple seconds to reflect on our day and the work that we're doing tonight. So we just bow our heads for 30 seconds. Thank you. I do believe joining us tonight are some of the vice chairs. Are those folks on? And if so, I don't really see everyone on my screen. Are vice chairs on tonight? Some? Awesome.
You have to.
Awesome. Well, I just want to welcome you all to our commission meeting. If you see the agenda in front of you, the goal tonight really is to get up to number 5 as quick as possible. We really want to dig into some of the discussion around the interim reports, particularly around housing and mobility and criminal justice reform. And just to preface, we will get to the other subcommittees at upcoming meetings. We just felt like it was important to really dig into 2 at a time and really hear from you all and have a robust and honest discussion. But before we do that, I want to acknowledge 2 folks. One, Amber, who's obviously you all know, recently made a change with Amber's direct supervision. She is now reporting directly to the mayor. That was something that we talked about, and we think it's a great move. And I just want to congratulate Amber. And she knows for a variety of reasons why that's important, but we all know Amber deserves it. And I just want to say thanks, Amber, for everything you're doing, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And in the same breath, Velvet, if you're on somewhere, she was also recently promoted and appointed as the assistant clerk of council. So Velvet, if you want to unmute yourself and if you want to say anything, we appreciate all you've done, particularly on the commission here. So thank you, Velvet.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate working with you all.
Well, we appreciate you. And I got to step it up, right? Assistant?
Yes.
And then basically just want to go into the group norms, and it's really just a reminder about our meetings. I felt like last meeting we had was was well run. I feel like it was timely. Folks that did have questions, I tried to get to folks in a respectful, timely manner. I just do want to remind us for our meetings is to continue the respectful conversation, honest and courageous as well. I'm gonna pick on Dr. Knight. The last meeting that we had, she raised some concerns, and those concerns were validated by many on the team here on the commission. So if it wasn't for her courageous and honest conversation, we wouldn't have got to where we were at the last meeting. So thanks, Felice, and thanks. Let's keep the courageous conversations going. An update that I wanted to provide you on. Thanks, Amber.
The mayor has joined us, Jay.
Okay, cool. Hey, Mayor, how are you today?
Doing great. Hello,
Sorry,
good evening,
see ya.
everyone, and thanks for everyone's continued work on this. And I've read the reports and so glad to have those in hand. And let's talk about them.
Awesome. We were getting there.
Yep.
The last piece we just wanted to mention was the Kellogg grant update for you all. We had spoken with everyone before about us applying for that grant and taking the lead. After internal conversations and some contemplation with some of our community partners, the YWCA is taking the lead on that grant, but we are working very closely with them on getting that submitted. And also, in full transparency, the work that we're doing on the commission will be involved in kind of integrated into their grant application. Amber and Sarah Fischera, who's our grant writer for the city, are working closely with them. Amber, I don't know if you want to just give a quick highlight, maybe 10 or 15 seconds about where we're headed with that grant, but we are not the lead. We are partnering with the YWCA on that Kellogg grant at this point.
We're just really hopeful that through this grant application, some of the work from the commission can be funded through that, through their work. We want to be the policy arm for the work that they're doing. So the Y is going to lead in the training. There's an education portion, there's some community engagement and advocacy. So we'll be the policy part of the mechanism that they're creating as a group.
Do you all have any quick questions on that Kellogg grant or that decision? Hey, Carol?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I'm assuming that at some point we'll have a strategic session with the Y and sort of see how all the pieces fit together. Can that happen before the grant is submitted, or what's the writing process looking like?
Well, it's my understanding that Amber and Sarah are working directly with them. They hired a consultant to put the grant application together. They are partnering with other organizations like Tri-County Cradle to Careers. There's a few other organizations that I saw. So my hope would be that they would at some point let us, take a crack or at least get a first draft view of the grant application. Is that your understanding, Amber?
I think they're working on it. We'll get the information back from Sarah and then we can share it with the group.
Awesome.
But I think Carol's question is a little deeper than that. I mean, Carol, I agree with you, Carol. We need to see the entire package and review it and have input and recommendations and sort of determine how we fit in to the whole scheme of things. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and actually even more than that. I mean, I think we've got an amazing group of collaborators based on how this is now turned out. And I do feel like, we need to be supporting each other and encouraging each other and, figuring out the interwovenness of our goals. So I think it's very exciting, but I wouldn't want to have to just hear about it, as this group, and then the Y, and then the Cradle to Career. I think we all need to be one big, happy collaborating think tank.
I certainly agree. When I did with them, I press upon folks that I know on that side at the Y with Letitia, Von Brandon, and Audrey that certainly the work that we're doing on the commission and the city have to be involved. And I think that they have every intention of involving us. But I think to Amber's point, from the grant application and the initial concept, I see a lot of advocacy, I see a lot of education, but then I see where rubber meets the road on the policy side, and I think that's where they're directing their attention towards us and what kind of involvement we can have. So I do think the commission's recommendations will play pretty well and also be integrated into the grant application. But I think it's pretty fluid. I think they're in a rush to get the grant application submitted because I do believe, Amber, it's due in a week, the initial application.
Due on the 25th.
Right. So we'll do our best to get that information to you. But I also want to just preface to the commission that this is not the only grant out there on out in the world. I mean, there's going to be other grant opportunities for us to apply for. Ones where we will take the lead on that. But I think this is probably a good go around to see how our partnership works with them. Any other questions on the grant? Moving on, transitioning to the interim reports. I just want to say, we've all read them. Amber, thanks for getting those out at least 2 weeks ago. I'm hopeful and encouraged and hope that everyone had a chance to read them. Certainly the mayor, myself, Amber, Dudley, and Mike read through them. We've got some thoughts on them. We appreciate you all getting that stuff to us. One of the key takeaways before we get into the two subcommittees was the template. We did have a discussion a few weeks back on the template and how onerous it was. I will say, as a council member, reading the recommendations, it was difficult for me to take one set of recommendations from one subcommittee and think about how that would look on city council and how we could push some of that through legislatively, and then looking at another subcommittee. So I am saying that I do think we should have a template that's used by all subcommittees for final submissions. And I know you all had pushed back a little bit on the template itself being a little bit too much or too requiring too much detail. And I'm happy to have that discussion, and so is Dudley and Amber, but I do think it's important that we have one single template that we agree on for final submissions. It's just much easier to read. It's much easier to take words and put them into actions on council. So I know Felice, you had talked about the template. Is everyone in agreement that a consistent template would be helpful? Maybe we tweak something the original template, but do we all agree that a consistent template is going to be helpful for final recommendations?
Yes.
Sure.
This is Felice. It absolutely is necessary. In fact, I was, looking over some of the recommendations, and it is dramatically different the way in which each subcommittee presented their recommendations. And it's only different because we all come from different professional backgrounds. Those of us who are primarily academicians and educators, we love charts. So we're going to give you charts with a bunch of words and not a whole lot of pictures or anything, or lots of explanation, because we're expecting you to ask us, well, what did you mean by that? And then we can give you all of the glorious details. But clearly that's not wieldy for the kind of work for that kind of quick read. Not that it's a quick read without, paying attention to the details, but the kind of quick read that's necessary for government work. So that is indeed, as you're saying, Councilman Saccharin, why we did specifically ask for a template before this work began. And because we wanted to know what you all needed as policymakers. So I would like to throw it back to the co-chairs to tell us what the template should be, so that is best for city government. I do think that the one that we were provided is still, it's not that it's unwieldy, but it requires information that we're not privy to in every single subcommittee. So if it can be tweaked in such a way that the extraneous portions that would be better filled out by city government staff is left out, fine. Or if those parts need to be in there, then you all need to be very specific about telling us which city staff members we need to connect with to get that material filled out appropriately. For example, I can't tell you what your 5-year timeline should be for implementation, but you can, or you could point us to the city staff who can lead us and, tell us how to fill that out.
Dudley?
Yeah, I agree with you, Felice. But just bear with us a bit. And for consistency, let's use the template that we sent. Those areas that you cannot fill out, just don't fill them out, okay? Just leave them blank. And because it will be a working document. And as a result of it being a working document, we would do exactly what you're suggesting. Where is the appropriate place within the city that can fill in those blanks for us? So if you just bear with us for a while, because we're going to be using that template, not just for the city, but as we move forward into other areas, those are the kinds of elements that they would like to see. So we're just trying to make sure that we all get used to the format, and where there are holes in them, leave it up to the entire commission, actually, as well as the city to fill in the blanks.
Okay, Councilman Gregory, that sounds great. The only thing I would request is that, Amber, could you please send the specific template? We had 3 versions that were sent to us initially. So just give us the one that needs to be used, and as we move forward, we will follow that. Thank you so much.
What I sent originally was the template and then examples.
The 2 of them are examples.
Okay.
Of what other communities did in filling in the blanks.
So what we'll do, I guess what we'll do is we'll make sure we recirculate the one template out to the commissioners coming out of tonight's meeting to make sure you all have it. And to Dudley's point, use that template, fill in what you can. If it doesn't pertain, it's not relevant, we could skip that portion. I think it's gonna be much helpful for us to have that consistent template. Any other questions on that? I think I saw, Tracy, did you have your hand up?
Felice answered it. I thought there were 3 different templates as well.
Okay. We got you. Okay, with that, I think we can transition to kind of the meat of the meeting. We could start with criminal justice reform. Jerry, you're on. The point was we got about 15 minutes to dig into this, and we really encouraged the discussion between commissioners and with Jerry. So Jerry, if you want to just kind of report out some of your recommendations, I think we could start.
Sure. We started with providing observations. We would much prefer to be calling them findings, but because in many cases we didn't have the data to convert it to findings, we chose to term them observations. So the first one, I think the 90-day question, we've already addressed specifically for us because of the breadth of the work associated with responding to the police audit. The suggestion that we're making that we do a similar audit of the courts, because the criminal justice system is not just the police, and if we're reforming criminal justice, you need to have that take a complete look in order to make those adjustments. So in addition to that, on a couple of occasions, we've talked with Amber about the Government Alliance Racial Equity Toolkit. And that is a tool, but also the Alliance is a network of municipalities that are doing work in this particular area. And it's my understanding that the Amber and staff would like to see Charleston become an active participant in that. So we would endorse that, but we also suggest that as we take a look at the recommendations that folks in other subcommittees look at the racial equity toolkit as a potential tool. The police department had not generated the 1-year evaluation of the racial bias audit at the time that we were asked to submit the report. So since that's a substantial portion of the work that we were supposed to do, we received that last week and are taking that up, and we'll have more specific recommendations in that area. We looked at the work, our charge, and the work of other subcommittees, and saw that there were intersections. I dropped into the internal review work group, and we talked about the intersection about policies regarding training and recruitment across the entire city that impact police department as well as the courts, and economic development and mobility and housing and mobility. We noted that in our charge, there was a question of addressing the reentry population. And neither of those reports were there specific. While they talked about employment opportunities, they talked about housing and affordable housing and special populations. There were not specific references to the reentering population and the special kind of concerns that they have. In the area of youth and education, the initiatives that the police department that are recommended in the racial bias audit, there's an obvious opportunity there for intersection, and we're hoping to see some of that. Our report analysis, a preliminary analysis of city council ordinances was attached. And there are a number of areas where we think the ordinances may be archaic, perhaps too vague, and need to be addressed. In other areas, there were areas that were not addressed that we believe might help clarify situations and reduce the possibility of racial bias. Specific recommendations made. One, the extension of time is clear. Consideration of the racial equity tool. We recommend that we pursue the Kellogg 2030 with the notion that the work that this commission would do would definitely generate enough money. At least the $1 million planning grant would help us get through the work that we needed to do. And that the city council also undertake a review and consider updating the mission guidelines and procedures of CPAC, the Citizens Police Advisory Committee, which is a critical entity. And I will stop there to see if there are reactions, questions, bricks to be thrown.
Any questions from anybody? If there aren't, I'm going to maybe put someone on the spot. So is there anything that Jerome kind of mentioned that kind of piqued your interest in terms of subject matter that you all have been talking on? I know Elvin, he mentioned economic opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm just trying to create a little synergy here. Jerome, I guess, can you pick one, Jerome, that you feel as though, if we had a low-hanging fruit or something that we could accomplish over the next month or 2 months on council, which one would it be?
To the extent that there is a focus effort in the area of affordable housing and discussion being made of carve-outs and taking into account special populations, whether they be people with disabilities or senior population, what have you, I would consider or recommend that we include provisions or considerations in terms of the reentering population. Similarly, as we talk about enhancing opportunities and access to transportation, if there are any things happening in those areas that could be special considerations, tag-alongs with improvements that we're trying to make to the general population, but recognize the special considerations and needs of the reentering population. Those are the kind of things that just come to mind right off the top of my head.
Mayor? I think you're on mute, Mayor. Now you're really on mute.
Can't hear you, Mayor.
I wonder if it's
Can't
the
hear you, Mayor.
headset.
Why don't I'll ask my question first, can I, Willie?
Go ahead. No, yeah, go ahead.
I just have a quick one, Jerome, because I appreciate having sat in on a lot of the committee meetings, and the low hanging fruit question, I think it's not necessarily a cross cutting, although everything we would do with criminal justice reform would impact the disparities that, you know, we're all identifying. But it seems to me that the ordinance committee has really, you know, picked on some longstanding laws that the city council has it in our power to change. And I think that's something that we should volunteer to do as a seated body, to work on the ordinances with our legal counsel's office and make that low hanging fruit.
Thanks, Carolyn. And Jerome, you've identified some of those?
Yes, in the report, there is a list of those that are being recommended to be reviewed, as well as potential areas for adding ordinances where there's not currently language.
Okay. I'm not sure if the mayor's joined us back. Dudley?
Yeah, Jerome, go back to some other things we discussed. What about partnering with other organizations that are involved in what we're doing, okay? Particularly as it relates to banning the box, bonding, and how bonding affects certain populations differently than others. And I know that there is already a movement of fit to try to do some of that. And whether or not the commission in some form or fashion can support those kinds of endeavors that may be either county or state. And perhaps the way the city may be able to get into it is through a resolution or something of support in some way. So I'm just looking in terms of low-hanging fruit. You know, there are things that we don't have jurisdiction over as a city, but there are other organizations, tri-county and statewide, that are doing things in criminal justice reform that perhaps we can either partner with, okay, or support in some way as a city.
Yeah, one of the I agree with that. And what we were trying to focus on were things that were in the immediate control. And we'll identify those things that are, you know, broader policy things. But another example, I believe the Economic Opportunity Group were talking about some special zone for employment and impact associated perhaps with the museum. That's something that the city, you know, has skin in the game. And in terms of who gets the franchises, who gets the space, and who gets hired by those folks, that's something that we could be exciting as part of the opening of the museum in 2022.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mayor.
Oh, I rebooted my computer. Sorry about that. Could I go back to trying to ask that question?
Go ahead, Mayor.
Jerome, you mentioned the municipal court system, and you're absolutely right. It's a vital component of the overall system. Of course, we only handle basically minor offenses at the city level, and bigger offenses go up to general sessions court and bigger courts. And I'll admit to you, when we did the racial bias audit a couple of years ago, I wasn't really hearing any complaints, as it were, about our municipal court. So maybe I just wasn't hearing them. And I have asked our court manager to report to me now weekly. But to tell you the truth, she's just giving me the number of cases and how many are disposed, and just kind of moving things through the court, just production more than anything else. So are you aware of some we have there that specifically be addressed? I'm not saying that we don't need to look at it, but I'm just curious.
Sure. So Mayor, we did get some data from the courts. And one of the areas that we were looking at were the number of cases that were decided without the individual charge being there, and a number of cases where folks were unrepresented. We believe that, we just had a quick skim of the data. We looked at 1 year. That's an area perhaps where there is, in fact, racial bias in being impacted. We think that there are those kinds of procedural kinds of things might be in place, and maybe simply, staffing. It could be administrative. It could be whether or not people receive notice. If I am a violator or I have a court date, how do you make sure that if I'm homeless or if I am transient, that I know that I'm going to have to be in court in a particular day? What is our mechanism to make sure, that we're communicating that and not simply saying, well, look, we sent the letter to the last known address. They didn't show up, so let's go ahead and make a decision, without the person being present. So it's those kinds of things.
That's right. Right. Well, I think you're right. And I hadn't thought of that before with the work we've done. So I'm glad you brought that to the table. And
it's the committee, not me. I'm just a messenger.
Gotcha.
And that's where you have the appointment of a counsel for the indigent accused, right?
Yeah, that's one of the suggestions. If you haven't taken a look at the 2-page kind of approach analysis that was laid out by the committee, it identifies the things that they think need to be looked at, identifies the data that we think that we might need, and a process for going about completing that priority. I would also say that as a commercial, with meeting with the Internal Review Committee, Darren, I know that they're talking about perhaps racial biased audits or of across other units, and I would suggest that if that is to be done, that the courts be given priority in that regard, since we made such a large investment on the police side. Doing the courts would kind of close the loop to make certain that we're getting maximum return on our investment.
Gotcha. Good idea. Thank you.
Carol, I think you had your hand up.
I just wanted to interject that that there was the 2-page report that Judge McFarland led his task force to do, but it came out a little behind the rest of the criminal justice report. So in case you didn't catch up with it, Mayor, it came out as a separate document that Amber circulated to us.
Yeah, that was my fault. I pushed the button too quick when I sent in the report on the due date and didn't include that as an attachment. But that is a very important document to go over if you haven't reviewed it.
Yeah,
Mayor, I gave you one complete document.
Okay, great.
Hey, Jerome, just one last question. How many of these ordinances that that you've observed are doing the Jim Crow era?
We did not. The crew that did that review did not do a historical, this is when the ordinance was passed kind of analysis. They kind of went through it at the first level saying, hey, we think that there may be the possibility, and then looked at some of the arrest data that was available and some of the data that was in the racial bias audit and verified that, yeah, there is something that's worthwhile being looked at. But no, we didn't do the specific historical analysis in terms of when the ordinances were passed and how many are Jim Crow era or just things that we've been living with forever.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Any other questions before we transition to Lucy? I wish we could spend another half hour just on this, and I feel like as we continue, we will dig deeper into the subcommittee discussions. But just in the sake of time, let's kind of transition over to Tracy, who's our chair for the Housing and Mobility. Tracy, you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. And good evening, everyone. I first want to say that the work that our subcommittee did, we all felt proud of at the end of the day. We felt a little scattered going through the process, but I think when we put it down on paper, we went, wow, we really have been doing some work here, and they've all done a good job considering there are only 7 of us. And we're all committed to continuing the work and meeting every 2 weeks and digging into each recommendation that the commission wants us to move forward with. So we're excited about that. So we had, the report said 8, but there were actually 9 at the end of the day. And I also want to thank Matt Ojala, who did a great job helping us get all the fonts the same and everything looking the same, doing some editing, because everybody was off doing their own thing. And we got it all into one document, which seemed like a task. And now we'll work on getting it into the proper format. We'll start off with recommendation number 1. We all know that we need funding for any of the things that we're proposing. So we looked at what are some potential funding sources. One was a developmental impact fee, which we do not have here in Charleston. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on all of these. We're still researching them, and actually, we've talked to city staff and to other developers and looking at things that we can do. But the developmental impact fee would be something that would be charged on new development and could go into infrastructure for new development like affordable housing. Commercial linkage fee, there's a long explanation here about commercial linkage fees and how that would work. We're continuing to do research on that. That would also be something that could go into the city's affordable housing fund. And we're looking for funding for infrastructure for affordable housing, heirs property fund, homeowner repair assistance programs, and potential applications for economic hardship, demo by neglect, and others. So we know there are funding needs for all of the recommendations that we're making, and we understand that city budgets, are not, we can't depend on the city to do all of this. We also see ourselves as an advocacy group. So we're continuously looking at what's coming up as far as any type of legislation or funding source. And so these are some recommendations about writing letters for the National Low Income Housing Coalition and that kind of thing. The second recommendation is concerning RAD, the Rental Assistance Demonstration. And we've done some work looking at what the City of Charleston Housing Authority has planned for their developments within the City of Charleston, and how could we help optimize their efforts, look at how could we create more units, how could we promote desegregation of the public housing. We have done some preliminary work around looking at the zonings and what the potentials are. I mean, for example, just on the east side, if you maximize zoning, you could take 420 something units to almost 4,000. That's being, aggressive. It may be 2,000 is what the city would choose to do, but looking at how we would do mixed income and how that would affect those neighborhoods. We also understand that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the community, looking at, how they perceive a change in their housing. And so we've put together some recommendations here that address that. And we are looking at going forward, doing working meetings related to each recommendation. So we would want to bring Don in, Don Cameron, the CEO of the Housing Authority, city council members, and discuss these things and do working meetings related to each individual recommendation. Mobility infrastructure, we felt at the end of the day that maybe our mobility recommendations needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, and we were looking at that right now. One of the ones that we will continue to work on is to look at safety efforts in minority communities. And our committee will be working with the city to get more data about which neighborhoods would benefit the most from increased street safety lighting right of way in order to properly access the mobility needs. And we're also looking at a sidewalk expansion improvement project potentially that was done in Greenville, South Carolina. The low line recommendation, we were looking, since this is, when you talk about low hanging fruit, since the low line is a city project that is, you know, seeking funding now, it is something that we really think would have a great impact on the city. And, you know, but is there more opportunity to look at it through the racial equity lens? And so I'm excited about this one because the low line, Friends of the Low Line, have voiced interest in getting more involved. And we're actually, our next meeting next Thursday is going to be specific to the low line project. So I would invite any city members or anyone there to attend that meeting so that we can give them the feedback. There will be representatives from Friends of the Low Line attending that, and they're already looking at ways. I think they heard from Community Development Committee that they did need to be more inclusive and they needed to look at everything through, you know, the equity lens. And I think we have an opportunity to really show what this commission can do, boots on the ground work, working with different projects that are going on in the city. So I am excited about that. And some of the action items that we looked at, you know, is to provide, you know, maybe they would have a community advisory council that would provide voting or decision-making input, looking at the design and programming, and also some special efforts to identify potential negative outcomes like disproportionate police activity impacting people of color along the low line. I was just talking to my daughter yesterday and she said, you know, kids walk the railroad tracks every day. I mean, you know, there are going to be impacts. And so we're looking at how wonderful this park will be, what will be the negative impacts and how do we address them up front. Getting the East Side neighborhood involved in ways that the low line will benefit them since the money is coming from the East Side TIF. So we've got some recommendations there, but again, I am excited that we will be discussing this with the low line next Thursday at 6 o'clock. So anyone who can attend, please do. Our recommendation number 5 was naming the West Ashley Bike Pedestrian Bridge. And we had some recommendations here on what the name could be, but we also wanted it to be inclusive of the community. So doing some type of public campaign to bring in recommendations from organizations within the city. And then the city could select a name from those solicited, but to get the community involved in naming that. The recommendation number 6 was the workforce housing and fee in lieu. And what we were looking at, and this was sort of in relation to the low line as well, you know, the need for affordable housing on the peninsula in relation to the low line and downtown and the fee in lieu. And we've discussed this in the commission meetings before. Right now, only one project has actually put the affordable housing units into their project. They're paying the fee in lieu, which that does create affordable housing in other areas, but it's not creating housing right there on the peninsula and in the areas that we want to make sure that we're keeping affordable housing. So we were recommending looking at an increase in the fee in lieu, maybe up to as much as 50% above the current levels. And we came up with some recommendations on maybe giving the developer some extra incentives, like being able to extend the affordable housing concierge services to them, going through the permitting process, eliminating some parking, expediting land entitlement for those buildings in place. And we also talked a little bit about how could we, in those properties, look at the rents being such that a housing authority voucher could be applied so that you could actually have lower income individuals living in some of these, because I know they're at 80%. And I know that some of our 80% housing, 80% of AMI rent housing, we can take a voucher. So if a voucher could be utilized at those, it would actually help lower income folks live there. Okay, recommendation number 7 had to do with heirs property. And we were looking at, this all started out around a conversation about the BAR jurisdiction north of the Septima Clark Parkway. But after we got into that, we really saw that our focus needed to be more on families that have homes they can't rehab. They don't have clear title. They're stuck in the system of, their house is falling apart. They can't fix it. They don't have clear title. They can't get a loan. They can't go through the process of clearing the title through the normal means, like going through the heirs property center. They don't have the funding. So we looked at that part of it, and these recommendations are pretty lengthy. Willie Hayward is on our committee, and he is an attorney who deals with heirs property. And he gave us like the cost for a family if they have to litigate, because basically if the whole family is not in agreement and they have to litigate to clear title, then there are these steps that they have to go through, and they can't go through the heirs property center because they'll only take their case if the family is all in agreement and identified. So this gets rather lengthy, but some of the things we were looking at was to have the Charleston School of Law have interns helping with some of the legal work. And we have already reached out to them, and they're very interested. And we've spoken with the city staff we spoke to Gianna and to Eddie Bynes about how that could work. But to bring in some funding through some of the funding sources we mentioned earlier, and to do some of these things that we could help families go through the process of clearing title, and therefore being able to keep their homes, and therefore be able to pass on the wealth of to the next generation, which is the goal, for them to be able to keep the property. We also looked at applications for economic hardship claims under the historic preservation ordinances, and we've had conversations with the historic preservation groups and with the BAR looking at some of those things. And these attachments are here. I'm not going through every one of these because we have a lot in our recommendations written out. Okay, recommendation number 8, we are looking at reenacting the bill 3922, the Community Land Bank Act. And actually 2 of my committee members are meeting with Representative Pendarvis next week to talk about this one. But this was a bill that was originally presented, and it was not passed. And it is believed that it could be passed, but it would create a land bank for the local jurisdiction. And we've got a long write-up here on this and about how that could work. But we feel like this would be a tool to help meet the community's needs and be able to support affordable housing and equitable development. And then the last one, but certainly not the most important one, is the Fair Housing Assistance Program, or the FAP. And we have been working with Councilmember Gregory on that, and Otha Metas with the Trident Urban League. And there's all the steps are here on how the city would go through that. And I think we've also discussed this in some of my reports. It would allow the city to basically enforce fair housing infractions. And it takes about 18 to 24 months to do this. We also looked at what we have in place now, and how we could beef up some of the fair housing rules that the city currently has in place. Again, I didn't read through every recommendation because they are pretty long, and I want to be sure that everybody can ask questions or discuss.
Thank you, Tracy. It's a lot.
Yeah, I know.
Very busy. I certainly have some questions, but I want to defer to those. Particularly, there were some things you mentioned about the impact fees that I guess I'll leave it up to the group for questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I have a quick question, Tracy. Do you know how the fee in lieu is calculated by chance?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I know that my subcommittee members looked at that. And the mayor may know exactly how it's calculated.
Yep, go ahead, Mayor.
So what we do, Alvin, is take the whole square footage of the development and apply $5.10 per square foot. Um, it's a fee based on the size of the development. So we had a big argument when we put it in place. Of course, all the development community told us we were setting this bar so high that we were going to nobody would want to build in Charleston, all this kind of stuff. And then immediately thereafter, everybody just pulled out the checkbooks and started writing the checks, and so it's clear the fee is too low, and from y'all's recommendation, we'll be coming to council soon. I'm not going to wait on this one. We're going to come on to council soon and suggest that we increase that fee, and maybe for a portion of the fee, what really um, jack up the price, which will be a disincentive in a way, or an incentive for them to build some of the housing as opposed to buying out, if that makes sense, as opposed to paying the fee.
Yeah, because to me, it kind of sort of seems like, of course, they calculate it up front, see what it is, and they just spread across the cost, whatever their product is, and pass it on to the end user. So,
That's right.
it has to be something that actually hurts, that makes them say, ouch, right? So
That's right.
Just my
And our
take,
committee,
that's all.
our committee also talked about how that will be monitored over the period of time that they have the commitment, to make sure that their teeth in the ongoing compliance as well.
Tracy, I like the linkage to all developments.
Mm-hmm.
And how that would really, really affect the affordable housing fund substantially.
Mm-hmm.
We've been having those kinds of discussions over the years. But the first is what we have been able to do with hotels. And I'm hoping at some point we'll be able to do some of the things that you've recommended, your group have recommended, to go beyond just hotels and to start going to other developments in the city as well. Because there are cities that have a housing linkage to all development.
Right.
And it would be great if we can do something similar.
Okay, Mayor, go ahead.
So, Tracy, thank you. This is very thorough and thoughtful and very inclusive. So, great recommendations. On the money recommendations, I do want to think out loud about broadening this thought to the county and the region, and not just the city. And when the Charleston Area Justice Ministry came to me a couple of years ago and was talking about this same thing, I recommended that we got to find some sustainable long-term income revenue source, and that's what led them to propose to the county to put the 2 mills in place that we all voted on last November that barely lost. So we need to try to expand the responsibility here to the other jurisdictions and get a sustainable income source. The development fee and the other things you've recommended would be good for the city, but try to get one for the county and even for the tri-county region, I think is a worthy goal. And it's okay, I think, for us to recommend, that larger jurisdiction. So on the mobility, I got to share with you my frustration, and this gets down to money also, for safety, for sidewalks, for bike lanes, anything in the public right of way. The city of Charleston receives, guess how much money from the highway tax? Zero, not a penny, not a fraction of a penny. And so I would, and I was glad to see the state DOT go to their complete streets policy. First time in their history where they're thinking about other kinds of mobility other than driving around in a car. But we've been advocating for those things, but honestly, we don't have an income stream for that either to pay for those things. So I would suggest that we ask the legislature if they really want to give responsibility to the cities for the public right of way, they need to share some of the revenue stream for us to take care of it. But anyway, and then I did want to point out to you on the low line, two things or a suggestion. Jerome, I really like this toolkit that you've recommended. And could I, Tracy, suggest to you that when you meet with the low line folks next week, that you challenge them to take this toolkit that Jerome is recommending to us and see if they would do an exercise to utilize the toolkit for what they're cooking up. I think that would be helpful. And then lastly, I hate to take so long, but you did mention correctly the Cooper River Bridge TIF District, but then you did mention a time or two. I just want to point out that let's see where I wrote it down here or highlighted it, that the funds come from the east side from which the funds originate. So just for clarity, and maybe you've seen the map and maybe not, but if you look at the Cooper River Bridge TIF District, it's mostly the commercial areas and mostly going up and down Meeting Street. It's not what I think about the traditional east side neighborhood. And we don't get TIF funds from existing residential development. We get it from new commercial development. And so, and the money has to be spent in the district anyway by law. So I just think that that's a clarification. The money comes from the district. It mostly comes from new commercial development, not from like the east side neighborhood existing development.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mayor, and we'll correct that in our.
Yeah, and maybe having a picture of the map would be helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Knight or Felice?
Yes, thank you. Just to point out 3 areas of overlap of areas of interest with the History and Culture Subcommittee, Tracy. We are also having a meeting with a representative of the Low Line next week, Thursday. I'm sure it's not the same person because our meetings are about at the same time. But this individual, Amber Johnson, put me in contact with her because they want to do some temporary art installations that reflect the history and culture of our community. And so we're going to be talking about ways to go about that programming with them and assist them with that. Also, our subcommittee has also recommended the creation of a developmental fee to be used to support public arts. And I know my vice chair, Angela Mack, is on the call. I'm not sure if she's available to say anything else more about that. And we're also running short on time, but certainly when our turn comes, we'll talk about that and our ideas concerning that. And I just think it's interesting that we have both proposed a similar method of creating funds to support some areas that don't have that support right now. And then lastly, the West Ashley Pedestrian Bridge. This is also an area that my subcommittee has an interest in to, again, use it as an art space. We're talking about the same bridge, I think we are, the one that's being built right now. Yeah, use it as a public art space. So I just wanted to point out those areas of overlap. And we're looking at them for slightly different reasons than your subcommittee, but I think we could work together in the future as we put together the final report for this commission.
And I think that was what was so helpful for me reading everybody's report, see the overlap there. And just like Jerome was talking about the affordable housing and mobility that his subcommittee is discussing, and how we go about doing that in the future, I think we need to talk about it. You know, do we attend each other's meetings periodically, or, I mean, I don't know, but to make sure that we continue those discussions.
Just a couple of things, Tracy. I've already had an extensive discussion with Scott Parker from the Low Line. So he is primed in terms of making sure that when they develop the Low Line, that it is done with an equity lens. So I think he's ready. And I think the mayor is absolutely correct. If that toolkit that Jerome provided us with was given to them, I think it would help them along the way. The second thing is the Low Line is touching just about everybody. It also touches Alvin's group as it relates to business development, naming the Low Line something different that would depict the African American experience. I'm just saying so the Low Line is touching just about everyone. And then lastly, for your mobility part, if you take a look, Tracy, at the recent analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, which was conducted by Gianna's office about a year ago, there are some mobility recommendations in there that could affect Carter, because if Carter routes are not going to certain neighborhoods, it can question the affirmative obligation of the city, as well as Carter, who gets transportation dollars of which Title VI is applicable to. So just take a look at that, especially for the mobility piece, although there are some other issues in there that you might find quite interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dudley. Any other questions right now? Ross, go ahead.
Thanks for that, and I appreciate everybody, allowing me to join the commission, and I've enjoyed listening to everybody. And I'm sort of catching up on a lot of the great work that y'all have done. But zoning and land use is sort of my background area, and also infrastructure finance. I've got some familiarity with impact fee programs and what works and most often what doesn't work around the state regarding impact fees. And I just want to add a perspective to this ongoing conversation. I think Tracy and her group have done a wonderful job of laying out some very interesting issues. But sometimes we can accomplish some very good goals by simply eliminating regulations, rolling back certain requirements. And I think that oftentimes that gets lost in the shuffle because we're all sitting around here trying to do something, make things happen. There's an instinct to say, well, that requires a new ordinance or a new requirement or a new law. And oftentimes that is the case, but sometimes, that other perspective is worthwhile. And, I always like to tell this story, the vast majority of human development around the world up until, the mid 20th century predates zoning. So the idea of land use and regulation coming in to prescribe specifically how development has to occur, where it must occur, et cetera, is really a new invention. And a lot of things that we see are the products of the regulatory choices that were made oftentimes a long, long time ago. And there's a very interesting historical analysis of zoning that we can talk about some other time. But one example that I think about sometimes is, you look around the country and a lot of the jurisdictions around the country that have eliminated single family zoning from their zoning code entirely to allow, diversity of housing citywide and allowing for more units, more density, things of that nature. And that's instructive because sometimes, our desire to achieve affordability can sometimes get in the way of the ultimate goal. And I'll give you just one small example. Accessory dwelling units, ADUs, are becoming widely recognized as a important part of solving the overall affordability crisis that not just Charleston, but jurisdictions all over the country face. And oftentimes under traditional, rigid zoning rules, it can be very difficult to permit these because you deal with setbacks and trees and all these different kinds of, permitting issues that make it difficult to get these units on board. Well, so last summer we passed an ordinance to overhaul our ADU process. And in a lot of respects, we rolled back a lot of great regulation, a lot of not so great regulation to make the permitting process easier. But at the same time, we, out of the best of intentions, we put in a requirement that in order to do one of these ADUs, you have to have a restrictive covenant on your property to lock in the affordability at 80% of AMI. You have to make certain compliance reports yearly. And, I was wondering about this the other day, and I asked our staff how many ADUs have been permitted in the city of Charleston since our new and improved ordinance came into effect. And the answer is 0, because the economics of it don't work. I was talking with a friend of mine in Burns Downs, the neighborhood I live in. They were very interested in an ADU and had seen something in the paper about it. And the economics of the substantial investment that it would cost to build one of these things, and then when you actually look at the returns and the expense and all this different stuff, it prevents people from doing it. Now, one thought could be, well, let's just eliminate that affordability requirement, right? And I can understand the initial reaction to that, which is to say, well, we want these things to be affordable. Well, if we could get 100 ADUs on the market next year because of that elimination of that requirement, we're getting more units into the marketplace. And at some point, the law of supply and demand, economics 101, has to come into effect, because I'm a believer that at the end of the day, to truly make a serious impact on affordable housing, we've got to find a way to get thousands of units on the market every year. And at some point, the price will come down just like any other commodity that's out there. And it's not, there's always going to be a place for these LIHTC deals and all these things that we're doing. I'm not saying that has no role, but I also think we ought to be looking for ways to get more housing built, more diverse types of housing built all across the city. And sometimes we can do that through a deregulatory approach. So very important discussion. And I think that it's worthwhile to continue, and look forward to being part of that conversation.
Ross, you are an in-house zoning expert, and with all of that, I think Dudley and I have spoken about a subcommittee that you get with Darren and kind of dig into all of this, because I think, to your point, is absolutely right. Certainly, we are trying to do something, but there's also a set of ordinances and zoning practices that we can take away from and still get to the goal that we need. So I wholeheartedly agree with you, Ross. Just a few things. Any other questions in regards to Tracy's presentation? I will mention, yeah, good job, Tracy. I will mention, when the mayor was discussing the ballot initiative regarding the affordable housing, and for me, it was connecting the dots about why we're doing the work we're doing, and in particular, this CALA grant and our community partnerships and why they're important. I will be very honest with you. When that ballot and when that initiative was on the ballot, I certainly was aware of it. But my wife came home and said, when I was voting, I didn't know anything about this. So it speaks to me about, that's a great idea, but who is advocating and communicating in the community about these needs? So that's where I see the synergy between this group and perhaps, our work with the Kellogg grant and the YWCA. We certainly need a partner at the table that helps push, from an advocacy standpoint, some of these larger scale initiatives, and that's one of them. So maybe we'll get that back on the ballot sometime in the future, but we do need a partner in the community that helps advocate and push that forward. And anything else?
Are we going to talk about because I think there was a question about the governor of the Alliance.
Yep, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure there's no other questions about Tracy's presentation. Before we conclude, I do know that we'll be speaking at the next meeting. We'll have 2 more subcommittees, a deep dive on 2 of those subcommittees at the next meeting. And then also, we're gonna talk a little bit about the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And basically, Amber can talk a little more in detail right now to give us a preview. But we want to basically ask you all whether that's gonna be worthy for us to be a part of that, which I think is it is. And then also talk a little bit about some of their training and resources. So Amber, if you want to just kind of quickly give us a preview.
I can come off mute. Okay. The Government Alliance on Race and Equity, it's a network of cities and governments that are working on advancing racial equity. They're working in several other cities. None that I know. I know they're working with Spartanburg in South Carolina, but that's the only other city in South Carolina that I know that they're working with. They help cities to operationalize equity. So the toolkit that Jerry included in their report, they teach you how to use that. They help you create a core team within your departments, help you develop, each department develop their own equity plan. They work with that core team for a year. So I got a proposal from them, I think about last year. But I'd probably have to get an updated one, but I think they would be a good group to bring in to help the city start to do some racial equity work.
Crystal?
You're on mute.
I can't hear you. I don't.
Now? No?
Yes.
Yep,
yes.
now we can.
Yes?
Now we can.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm using 2 different devices. Sorry about that. I'm not, I know we've actually talked a lot about the government alliance. Is this the one that's with Race Forward or affiliated with Race Forward? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And in just reviewing a lot of the information, it does fit in with a lot of the work, well, most of the work that we're doing within the special commission. So I'm wondering if it would make sense for us to just go ahead and make a motion for it to be able to go to council for approval. If we could do that tonight versus waiting until our next meeting 2 weeks from now.
Is that the pleasure of the commission?
Was that a motion?
Yeah, was that a motion?
I can go ahead and make it an official motion. I, Crystal Robinson Rouse, would like to officially make a motion for us to begin work with the Government Alliance and for it to go forward to City Council for approval.
Second.
Awesome.
Just a discussion part of it. One, the membership fee is how much, Amber?
The membership fee is $3,000.
Okay, and the work to do the
3,000
to do the analysis is what? In other words, what I'm trying to get at is if we're recommending something to council that has some dollar figures tied to it, okay? We just need to make sure that that's clear.
The last proposal that I received last year, it was $72,000. And that included the $3,000 for the membership fee.
Okay. So, Crystal, is that your motion? That we move forward and recommend to council to fund? Pretty dog there.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm saying that because, I mean, you know, I'll go back to our very first gathering, you know, it's not going to be a free venture for us to really do the huge lift that we need to do in our area to make sure that the work gets done in the way it needs to get done. So yes, that is my pleasure, my motion.
All
right. Carol, sorry.
I was just curious, were the chairpersons given more information about the alliance, or, you know, I've heard of the toolkit. Jerry shared that with the criminal justice reform, and I've looked at that, but in terms of the overall organization, I have no problem saying that it's a, you know, that it's a recommendation, but I do think that maybe we need to, you know, be unified as a commission, that we're in agreement that we're going to get our monies for the 75,000 or whatever, because I about this group until now. So not that I'm the be all end all of deciders, but I think it would be great to be able to explain to our council members in particular, you know, what it is we need money for. So anyway, that's just my question and suggestion.
Thank you, Carol. So Crystal, is the motion for the commission to recommend, because at some point we'll still have to go to council for that decision, but is the commission wanting to recommend that we move forward with a partnership with them, or,
Yes, that's the motion for that to be a recommendation. Yes.
and there was a second, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mayor?
Could I ask Amber if she would go ahead and request an update to the proposal that we got from them and make sure the pricing and the scope of the work is, up to date and shared with everyone?
I can do that.
Great.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any noes? The ayes have it. So that recommendation does pass commission. I don't know if there's anything, any other business to take before our commission this evening. Anyone else have anything before we depart?
So, yeah, Mr. Chairman, we noted earlier, somebody made reference to it being Black History Month. I would challenge each of the members of the commission to find a book, do some research to deepen their knowledge. For example, Marvin, Dr. Marvin Delaney, I believe in 1998, wrote an article in the Avery Review regarding the history of Black police officers in Charleston. It's just a snapshot of a period of time. But for example, for the folks in our committee, it might raise up some thoughts and some questions that you may not have thought about. So I would just challenge everyone to find something to read beyond what's in the Post and Courier.
That's good advice regardless.
Good advice.
Thank you, Jerry, for that. Dudley, do you have anything?
I mean, if some of the issues and concerns that you may have with any of the reports that we didn't cover, could you just send them to Tracy and Jerome so that they can consider them, please?
And also, Mr. Chairman, if there's a desire to talk about any of the issues, for example, the education and youth discussion about the experience of young people in the courts, might be something that we need, might be some low-hanging fruit, as you suggest, that we might be able to make some progress on. So just think about those things, and we'll try and put our subcommittees to work and together.
Could I ask Tracy and Jerome to take a look at your recommendations, determine which one you think is low-lying fruit, okay, and make a recommendations to the commission accordingly? If it's something that needs to go before council in resolution form, ordinance change, whatever, okay, if you can just make a recommendation to the commission on which ones you think we can do now. And I think some of even what Ross was talking about, we can do now.
So, and I hate to prolong the discussion, but I want to raise this. The low-hanging fruit stuff that we can do may not be the things that have the most systemic impact. So while we want to make sure that we focus on that, what we can do to demonstrate that we are moving forward, I urge all of us to make certain that we continue to look at the basic systemic stuff that needs to be unpacked in order to make certain that we achieve the goal that the commission was established for.
Jerome, I really appreciate that because I call it SOS. Symptom are systemic, and we need to make the distinction between the two. One generally gets us to the other, and sometimes you have to deal with the symptom first before you can get to the systemic. So I appreciate that comment.
Thank you, Dudley. Thank you, Jerry. Just some takeaways for us before we depart. Amber is going to send out the template for you all. We'll get that out. And then also the alliance, the current alliance proposal, if we can get that sent out so we can review it and have that discussion if we need to have that at the next meeting. Those are the key takeaways that I heard from folks. Is there anything else? All right. Well,
Thanks, everybody.
Great commission. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye. Take care, Mitch. Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
You did Khalil Gibran. Was that the prophet the other night that you were reading from?
Yeah.